At exactly 6:23 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, Buckingham Palace did something shocking. Not to the public. Sources say this is still under heavy investigation, but behind palace walls they released a 12-word statement, just 12 words, and in those words they detonated a marriage, shook a man to his core, and pulled a child out. Of the British line of succession, the statement was blunt: Prince Harry is not the biological father of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. No softening, no apology, no discussion, just DNR, just law, just consequences. 3 independent labs court approved, testing no biological connection. End of debate. By the time most people were pouring their first coffee, a constitutional earthquake had already hit. By nightfall, Harry would be on the floor of his California home, struggling to breathe, repeating a single sentence like a prayer: I am his father. But biology doesn't bend for belief, and the Crown doesn't either. To understand why the palace acted so fast, we have to understand what that statement really was and what it wasn't. This wasn't tabloid gossip, it wasn't palace rumours whispered to friendly reporters. This was a formal constitutional investigation. Every word was reviewed by constitutional lawyers, vetted by legal experts, and approved at the highest levels of government. This wasn't about feelings. It wasn't about saving reputations. It was about succession law in Britain. You only enter the line of succession if you are biologically royal. The palace said without hesitation, Archie is not. That means one thing: someone presented a child to the world as eligible for the throne when he wasn't. That's not awkward, that's not embarrassing, that's potential fraud against the Crown. Sources inside the Sussex Circle say it was 10:23 p.m. in Montecito, California. Harry was getting ready for bed when the news hit. His first reaction, not panic, disbelief. He thought it was a hacker hoax. He called his UK lawyers when they confirmed it was real. When they told him the palace had started an investigation and suggested he might not be Archie's biological father, Harry said 2 words: impossible, insane, but the body knows the truth before the mind does. His breathing changed, his speech faltered, reality started to slip. Standing there, trying to explain, was Meghan Markle. Witnesses say she tried to tell him there were reasons, complexities. That's when Harry looked at her, and everything broke. By the second call, his body was already betraying him. This wasn't shouting, this wasn't throwing things, this was quiet and dangerous. Witnesses say his breathing went fast, shallow, almost mechanical. His words stopped making sense, his thoughts no longer followed a line. This is what real shock looks like. He wasn't reacting to a rumour, he wasn't responding to social media chatter. He was realising the palace might tell the world something about his own child that he hadn't been told. He kept saying it couldn't be true, insisting the science had to be wrong, clinging to the idea that love might override genetics. But truth delivered without warning doesn't care about feelings. Within minutes, Harry couldn't stand. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, and then he collapsed. Not metaphorically, physically, on the floor of his Montecito home. The same man who survived combat tours in Afghanistan suddenly couldn't breathe under the weight of a single sentence: you are not his biological father. What followed wasn't a palace statement, it was an emergency. Paramedics were called just before 11 p.m. Pacific. They arrived within minutes. They didn't find a man arguing. They didn't find a man demanding answers. They found a man spiraling, hyperventilating, disoriented, clutching his chest. They treated him on site, but it quickly became clear this wasn't something you could talk down in a living room. He was rushed to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital under what medical staff later described as a psychological crisis, with possible cardiac involvement. Once inside that hospital room, stripped of titles, stripped of control, Harry did something that shook even seasoned professionals. He repeated the same words over and over: I am his father, I know, I am his father, I held him, I raised him. Doctors later said it wasn't denial, it was grief colliding with reality at full speed. Harry wasn't arguing biology, he was clinging to identity. Because when you take biological fatherhood from a man whose sense of purpose is built around family, you don't just remove a fact, you remove the ground beneath him. And then Meghan arrived, and everything changed. Witnesses noticed immediately she wasn't falling apart, she was focused, alert checking her phone, privacy protocols, medical records, who had been notified whether the media knew she was contacting lawyers, PR advisors, and contacts in the UK hospital staff. Later said her energy wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And that contrast tells a story. One person was unravelling, the other was controlling the flow of information. Whatever had happened before December 2nd, whatever Harry may or may not have known, by that night, one thing was clear: they were no longer operating from the same version of reality. But the real question isn't how this ended. The real question isn't how it ended, it's how it ever started. And why the palace had been investigating for months before anyone knew this didn't begin with suspicion, it began with paperwork. In April 2025, officials at Buckingham Palace started a routine legal review of succession records. Normal. Boring. Administrative housekeeping. Until something didn't line up. Archie's birth certificate was legally valid, but oddly structured small inconsistencies, minor protocol deviations, the kind of things clerks notice. Because noticing is their job, then came the first real crack. The certificate listed Portland Hospital as the place of birth. Palace lawyers asked a simple question: was Meghan Markle ever admitted there? The answer was clean and devastating: no admission, no delivery. No record of Meghan giving birth at that hospital. The staff said they had been told to expect a royal birth. They were prepared. It never happened. That's when this stopped being clerical. Because if the official record of a royal birth was wrong, investigators had no choice but to ask the question. The palace hates what else isn't true. That question opened a door. Through that door came a tip no one could ignore. In June, palace legal teams received an anonymous tip through a secure channel, not vague, not gossip, from a former employee at a Los Angeles fertility clinic. The claim was blunt: Meghan and Harry used donor sperm to conceive. Archie dates were given, clinic names, procedures, enough detail that palace lawyers couldn't dismiss it. They got court authority and pulled the records. What they found wasn't ambiguous multiple life cycles, Meghan as the patient, Harry providing samples, but not used donor sperm in the successful embryo. The key document, the consent form, Meghan's signature, a blank line where Harry's should have been. A handwritten note claiming verbal consent due to travel. That blank line became the fault line of this entire story. Because consent isn't feelings, consent is a record. And the record showed Harry never agreed in writing to donor sperm being used to create a child, who would later be presented as his biological heir. Medical files later explained why donor sperm even became part of the story. Prince Harry had documented sperm motility issues, serious enough to make natural conception unlikely. Eve success rates low. They tried anyway, twice it failed. Then donor sperm was used, and the embryo that became Archie was created without Harry's genetic material. At that point, suspicion became obligation. Belief wasn't enough, only Dina could settle it. Once donor sperm was confirmed, the palace had no legal wiggle room. If Archie was in the line of succession and his biological status was uncertain, the crown was exposed. Princess Anne was brought in to review the evidence. Her reaction was immediate: this is not a family matter. This is constitutional. The palace moved to get Dina confirmation, not quietly, not behind closed doors, but in a way that could hold up in court. British courts asserted jurisdiction over succession law. US courts cooperated in August, during what Meghan and Harry thought was a routine paediatric visit. In California, court-authorized staff collected Dina samples from Archie. Those samples were sent to 3 independent accredited labs, 2 in the US, 1 in Switzerland. Chain of custody was airtight. The results came back in September. All 3 labs agreed no biological relationship, none. Prince Harry was not the genetic father of the child, publicly listed as 6th in line to the British throne. When King Charles III was briefed, he asked the only question that mattered: does Harry know? Based on the evidence, the answer was devastating: probably not, not, fully not, clearly not, in writing. From that moment, the palace wasn't asking whether to act, they were deciding how fast and how public. Once due results were confirmed, options disappeared. Only obligations remained. British succession law is absolute. It doesn't bend for emotion. It doesn't negotiate with modern sentiment. Under the Act of Settlement, succession is based on bloodline descent from the royal house, not marriage, not caregiving, not love. Which means Archie could be legally Harry's son under California law and still be constitutionally irrelevant to the British Crown Parliament. Understood the stakes immediately. Emergency discussions were held. Legal scholars spoke plainly. Without biological descent, Archie could not stay in the line of succession. Not temporarily, not symbolically removing him wasn't punishment, it was procedure. And that's what made it brutal. No one was being judged, but everything was being corrected. Legal experts didn't sugarcoat it. If Meghan Markle knowingly used donor sperm, failed to inform Harry properly, and then presented Archie as biologically eligible for the throne, that's not a misunderstanding. That's potential fraud against the crown. And fraud against the crown isn't symbolic, its criminal extradition was discussed. Not announced. Not requested, but legally it was plausible. The palace made one thing clear: they weren't publicly accusing anyone. They were investigating. Thoroughly at the same time, public sympathy split sharply. Polls showed support for the palace's legal position, strong emotional sympathy for Harry, deep discomfort with how the truth came out. One thing most people agreed on: Harry didn't look like an accomplice, he looked like collateral damage. But the public didn't get to ask the hardest question, so we will. The question the palace asked, the question King Charles asked, the question William asked, the question no investigation can fully answer. Did Harry know? The evidence is messy. Clinic records show no written consent from Harry. Friends describe a man desperate to be a father. Medical notes show failed attempts. Rising pressure, ticking time. Some believe he was told vaguely, selectively, strategically. Others believe he suspected but avoided clarity. Some think he was completely deceived. Here's the uncomfortable truth: sometimes people don't lie to others, they lie to themselves. And when belief becomes survival, questions become dangerous. Harry may never know exactly when the truth slipped past him, only that when it finally arrived, it destroyed everything he thought he understood. And that brings us to the end of this expose, or more accurately, to what this expose really is.